All right, welcome to the Sweet Science of Fighting podcast. Today we have the Fight Dietitian, Jordan Sullivan. Welcome, Jordan.
Hey, James. Thanks for having us, mate.
No, thanks for coming on. Obviously, you're highly recommended by a previous guest, Mayor Orney, who was on a couple of episodes ago. So had to get you on, of course. And you're working with a lot of, I guess, the New Zealand and I guess some of the Australian UFC fighters as well. Do you want to maybe give a brief background of yourself and maybe even name drop some of the people that you're working with?
So my name's Jordan. I'm a dietitian. I'm a performance dietitian, and I work mostly with combat sport athletes. So about 4 or 5 years ago, I started the Fight Dietitian, which is basically a company that specializes in performance nutrition for combat sports. And I guess my background in sport, I always grew up playing rugby, but I always boxed in my off seasons, and then got a pretty bad injury with rugby, and then kind of transitioned back to boxing. And then obviously as like jiu-jitsu and MMA got a bit more popular down under, then kind of just transitioned into that. And I was at university studying exercise and nutrition science, and I think just the two worlds just kind of blended together, right? And then I finished university. I did a master's degree. I was silly enough to pay for that expensive piece of paper, and then I went to Canada. And then, just kept training over there. And I think I didn't have university as an excuse to kind of hold me back from telling people what to do. And it was just a natural progression. I think I just, was competing in tournaments and whatnot, and then like cutting weight myself. And then my teammates were cutting weight, and we were doing all sorts of weird, silly things. And it was a bit funny because like I was the guy with 2 degrees in nutrition, and we were still doing it terribly. And it kind of started this whole journey of like, oh, how do we like figure out how to make this a bit easier and like, not as crappy, and can we eat carbs, can we not eat carbs? And we just like kind of figured it out there. And then it was just a natural progression. I think it was just good timing, to be honest. I think at that time, like you said, I work with a lot of guys from City Kickboxing, so I'm the dietitian at the City Kickboxing gym. And a lot of those guys were still coming up, like names like Israel Adesanya were really only just making a splash on the scene. Kai Kara-France, who's fighting for a flyweight title, was, I've worked with him every single one of his UFC fights, but he wasn't really on the radar back then. So, guys like Dan Hooker were around, but like still coming up to their prime. So I think it was just good timing, really, is that just kind of caught that wave and rode that with the guys. And a couple years on, I think we've been very fortunate to have a lot of touches around Australia, New Zealand, and the world, to be honest, to kind of spread that message that we really do promote better weight cutting practices. And you don't have to cut so much weight, and if you are going to do it, there's a better way to do it. So I guess that's the short 2-minute spiel.
Nice. No, actually that's perfect. I actually wanted to start this podcast on the weight cutting topic. Obviously, if you search some of the horrific headlines for weight cutting, there's obviously been hospitalizations, deaths, all sorts of rad or bad things going on within weight cutting. So maybe let's start with the common mistakes, maybe the mistakes you were making before learning all of these things back in your day when you're fighting, and just, I guess, general common mistakes that you see as well among the fighters that come to you.
Yeah, I think it's pretty common. Like, I made all the same mistakes that everyone made. Like, I did a terrible cut when I was in Toronto for like this. MMA was like illegal in Ontario for a while when I was there. So we had this like weird underground comp, and there was like 3 weight divisions, and I think I had to lose something like 12 kilos, and I went like full keto. Like, and keep in mind, I had like 2 degrees at this stage. Like, I had a master's degree. I should have known better. But yeah, I think I was 12 kilos over 10 weeks or something like that, and it was horrendous, and got smashed. I think I got submitted in like within 2 minutes or something. Just terrible. Like, I did all sorts of terrible things, like getting in hot baths that were way too hot. I remember being in my apartment by myself, and day before a weigh-in or in a competition, and like being in a bath and passing out because it was so hot, and I was so fatigued and kind of like going under, and running in sauna suits and sweatsuits just uselessly, and lots of terrible things. But I think when you're in that environment, at least back then, it wasn't really, I wouldn't blame my coach or blame anyone else. We just didn't know any better. Like, there just wasn't really that information. Like, it's a really new field. I think MMA as a sport itself is like, 25 years old, just over 25 years old. And so, like, you think of like more traditional sports like wrestling and whatnot, they've been around since the ancient Greeks, for hundreds and hundreds of years. And like, so there's been a lot more time, and you think of those mainstream American sports, there's been a lot more time and money invested. And then the sports science has obviously grown with those sports. I think what we're starting to see with MMA and combat sports in general, we're starting to see the growing of that sports science. But that definitely wasn't there back, when I was competing. And that was only, like 5, 6, 7 years ago. So it wasn't even like that long ago. And so now it's really cool to see how that has come. And like a lot of the common mistakes you see guys, they still make them today, like cut carbohydrates. I think that's worldwide around most sports. People think that you want to lose weight, you want to cut carbohydrates. I think you see guys that like really want to restrict water. Like it's a real like thing in boxing. I noticed like it's tough to do training sessions like dehydrated and not have a sip of water for the mental toughness, and that's just not good. You see guys like running in sauna suits thinking that like just being hot is going to burn more calories, and you know, getting in saunas and sweating out sweat and losing fluid, thinking it's going to help them lose weight. Like all of these things, like that still happen today. They were happening back then. It's just, I think that's been a big eye-opening experience for me, like going through that and doing that. But then, you know, it's good to experience that because then you can chat to these guys and be like, hey man, I did it too. Like I did it, I stuffed up, and it definitely makes it a bit easier to enforce a bit of change on them.
Yeah, for sure. Because obviously some of those methods obviously have their place within a weight cut. For example, using the sauna suit, being in the sauna, etc. Do you want to maybe, I guess this is specific to the individual, but maybe run through generally how a weight cut should run from, say, beginning of fight camp, whatever it is, through to fight day? Doesn't have to be too detailed, but just a general idea. So listeners can get an idea that they're not running in sauna suits 8 weeks out or anything like that. Yeah,
I'll give you a quick rundown. Basically, at the start, what you want to do is you pretty much want to work backwards from whatever your weight is. And I think it's important when you're figuring out what your fight weight is that you actually put a bit of thought into it. I know, like, a lot of times when I was training, competing, you kind of just look around the gym and just look at guys the same size as you, or like talk to your teammates and be like, what do you think I should go to? And they're like, you go to this weight division or you go to that way. And it's just like, there's no less like thought other than that into it. And so like, I encourage a lot of people, go get like a body scan, go to someone who knows how to do caliper testing and get an idea of how much body fat you actually have, because when you're dieting what we call the fight week or fight camp phase, you're just losing body fat. Like that's what you want to do. You want to manipulate your body fat to a point that you're still healthy and you can still train and you can still fuel those sessions properly, but you can slowly bring that body fat down. And what you want to end up at right before that fight week starts, so say 4, 6, 8, 10 weeks, however long you want to give yourself, you want to be at your ideal performance body fat. And like we know for guys and girls that can vary. So for guys that can vary from anywhere from 4% body fat up to 12, 13% body fat. Girls, it can vary from anywhere from 6, 7% right up to, 16, 17, 18% body fat. So having a good understanding of how your own body responds to different body compositions is really important. And a little side note, I think this is important too, in not just in combat sports, but sports in general. I think we get these really messed up ideas, like, I've got to have a six-pack, I've got to be shredded. For a lot of people, that's not attainable. And you're absolutely not going to be at your optimal performance weight if you look like that. A very, very small percentage of genetic outliers will look like that. The rest of us mere mortals, we're probably not going to look like that when we're at our ideal performance weight. So figuring that out is really important. Like, what is an actual weight class that's appropriate for me that I'm going to feel good and perform? Because at the end of the day, it's not, you don't get a medal for jumping on the scale and making weight. You get a medal for competing. That's the first thing. Next thing we always say is, like, we need to figure out how many calories you need to eat, because you don't want to eat in too big of a ditch. When I say that, I mean you don't want to go on a big calorie deficit. It's a big mistake people make, because if you're in a deficit, it doesn't matter if you're in a little deficit or a big deficit, you're going to lose weight. But being in a little deficit and a big deficit has very, very different effects on your body. And a lot of people make the mistake of just, okay, I'll play it safe and just go into a huge deficit for 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 weeks, whatever it is this fight week. And as that time goes on, their body goes deeper and deeper in this ditch. We experience what we call low energy availability, which is a somewhat new of a concept that's becoming more and more well known throughout the sporting world, of just how detrimental it is for both performance and health. And, this is things where girls will lose their menstrual cycle, guys' testosterone will go, your metabolic rate will go down because your thyroid gets affected, you get gastrointestinal issues, your likelihood of injury increases, your risk of concussion, all these things go up because you're in this low energy state. You don't have enough calories to support your body's basic needs. So understanding how many calories you need is really, really important. So they're the two biggest things at the start. What weight class appropriate, how much body composition you have, how many calories can you eat so you're not just, putting yourself into like a prisoner of war fight camp and just getting through it. And then what you need to figure out is, okay, if I get to that fight week, how much weight can I cut? And when we say cut, we're talking about the 3 to 5 to 7 days leading up where you manipulate fluid in your body. And this is probably the most dangerous part of this whole process, is the manipulation of fluid, because a lot of people make the mistake of thinking when you're in a fight camp or you're cutting weight or whatever, they think of, okay, I'm in the sauna sweating out, am I running in a sauna suit, or I'm in a bath. That cutting weight and cutting water weight starts in that 4 to 5 days when you cut out carbohydrates, you cut out salt, you cut out fiber, you do all of those things. What that does, it reduces fluid from different components in your body, and you slowly get lighter. And then the guys on the last day go, hey, I've got 2, 3, 4 kilos to go. I've got to go jump in a sauna and sweat that out. So you're already dehydrated by the point you get there, by the time you get to that point, and then you become more dehydrated. So understanding what limits are safe to do in that scenario is really important, because the body, like, we're humans, we're super survival machines. Like, there's a reason there's 7 billion of us on the earth, and like, there's a reason we've lasted so long, is because we're pretty good survival machines. We're good thermoregulatory animals as well, which means that we're made to sweat. We're the best sweaters in the animal kingdom. So our body has really good systems for handling heat and handling fluid. But there's a point. Like you said, people have died doing this. People have got really injured. So there's an obvious point where you become too dehydrated, where it's very detrimental. Like, you go out and go for a run for an hour or two, like, you can easily not drink some water and come back and just rehydrate after. Your body's fine. But we need to figure out, where's that point? Like, James, where's that point for you and your body, and where can we push these? Where do we want to stay safe? What methods work best for your body? Figuring that out is really important. And then what you essentially do is you just put all of that together. Okay, what's my body composition? How many calories do I need? How much weight do I have to lose each week to get to that weight? And then I know, by using these different methods to manipulate fluid, how much weight extra can I get off? And then what that's going to be my ideal fight weight. So it's really just putting those three components together. And I think a lot of people kind of think, yeah, you know what, I'll just eat a couple cans of tuna and some crackers and maybe I'll get there. It's like, yeah, like, you probably will, like, you'll go in that huge ditch, but if you want, there's a lot more science out there today, and there's a lot more better approaches that you can do where you can lose a decent amount of weight, and you can cut that water weight to a decent extent, but do it very safely and do it within the confines of the science that we know to be safe. So, like I say to all my athletes, like, it's not hard making weight. Like, anyone can make weight, but making weight in a very scientific and safe manner is a bit more challenging.
Yeah, for sure. Let's go straight to the beginning of that to make it really practical for listeners. In terms of figuring out how many calories essentially they can eat a day to maintain their weight, and then to figure out how much they need to eat in a deficit to lose that weight. Is there an easy way that you recommend for people to essentially figure that out for themselves?
Yeah, go to Google and put in calorie calculator and there's about 10,000 of them. Put whatever one you're in. I use a super simple one where I do 125 kilojoules, which, if you divide that by 4, is calories. So say 125 kilojoules times your body weight. That's how many kilojoules you need. But if you want that number in calories, divide it by 4. So I'll say that again, 125 kilojoules times your body weight in kilograms. That's how many kilojoules you need a day, but if you work in calories, divide that by 4. That's how many calories. That's your baseline. And then if you're active and if you go out and you play sport or live an active life or work a physical job, whatever, go look up a physical activity multiplier. Just put that into Google and it'll tell you how much to times that number by, and that's probably going to be pretty close to how many calories you need per day. Thing is like, nutrition science in that sense is not that accurate. Like, James, if I wanted to figure that out for you, I could do those numbers, but I really don't know if those numbers are accurate until you go and do it. And I think I encourage everyone to try that. Just go and do it. Do you maintain your weight eating that many calories? Are you putting on weight, or are you losing it? That's going to be your best bet, because otherwise you have to go sit in a gas chamber and I have to look at everything that goes in and out of your body for hours on end, and no one wants to do that.
Oh, for sure. So, say someone started that, they're losing weight to their fight week before their weight cut. What is your ideal, body weight come that fight week? So essentially, how much is, in terms of percentage of body weight, your optimal essentially to lose on that fight week before the weigh-in? Do you have a range that you like fighters to be at, or is there something that's too much or too little?
Yeah, it really depends on what level they're at. Like, if they're an amateur, I'd tell them just don't lose any weight. Just stay as close as you fight weight. I don't think if you're an amateur, it's really worth it. Like I said, you don't get paid, or you you don't get any awards for making weight. You get out there and you get awards for performing, and getting that experience as an amateur is so much more valuable. When you're a professional, especially a high-level professional, there's a few more ins and outs of it. By the textbook, we know we can safely move up to 10% of your body weight. So if you fight at 70 kilos, coming in at 77 kilos, if you know what you're doing, you can not easily, but you can very safely and scientifically move 7 kilos of your body weight. So if you're 100 kilos, you're fighting 100 kilos, you're 110 kilos, that's 10 kilos there. 10% is quite a lot, though, if you don't know what you're doing. I think 8% is probably more realistic for even guys working with a professional. And if it's the first couple times you're doing it, you really shouldn't be aiming to do any more than 3 to 5%. Because the thing is, you've got to play around with these different strategies. And even though we know what these strategies do, like the strategies, you like cut carbohydrates and you lose water weight. Anyone that's tried a keto diet, like I did stupidly years and years ago, you lose a lot of weight fast because you lose water weight. You're not losing actual weight, you lose water weight. Yeah. Cut fiber out, you lose a lot of the good stuff that's in your guts for a couple of days, you flush all that out. Salt holds water in your body, so if you cut that out, you can lose. But everyone's body is different, and that depends on the type of diet that you've been eating habitually most of your life, or in the weeks leading up. It depends on your genetics, depends on your activity style, depends on where you live, the environment you're in, so many factors. So I can give you ranges, but you don't really know until you do it. And I think it's so much better to err on the side of caution, especially if you're just starting out and doing this. Like, I think if you're an amateur, just don't bother. Like, focus on the fight, focus on the competition. Yeah. That's what's important. If it comes to a point where you're professionals and you're looking around and you're like, guys are literally way bigger, and then that's a risk. That's a real risk. And unless you're infighting and you've been punched by someone who's 5 to 7 kilos or head kicked by someone who's a lot heavier than you, that's a thing. Like, I don't like people who say, oh, no, we shouldn't do it, because that's a thing, and it hurts when you get head kicked by someone a couple weight classes ahead of you. That's when you go, okay, how do I look at these strategies and figure out what's safe for my body, and then how do I practice them so when it comes time to do it live in this fight week, I'm comfortable with it and I know what my body can do and I can do it safely.
Yeah, no, it's good advice for everyone listening too. You mentioned as well, obviously going on that keto diet on one of your mistakes for your cuts. Do you want to maybe dive into... I've been asked multiple times as well by athletes about should they drop carbohydrates, and it's like, man, you're training like twice a day and you want to get rid of carbohydrates. It's dumb. But do you want to maybe dive into maybe why doing a keto diet might not be the best, I guess, option for people to do while they're training?
Yeah, it's good advice. I guess for MMA and combat sports, probably not the best. To understand it, you just need to know like this very basic idea of what we call bioenergetics, or energy metabolism, how your body metabolizes and uses different fuels for energy. And what I mean when I say that is we can break down carbohydrates, protein, and fats for energy. Like, they're our macronutrients. We barely use protein, so we'll ignore that for now. But at very low intensities of exercise, our body is very good at using fats, because fats are this big, thick energy storage hormone. There's lots of calories in there. I describe it to people like if you're making a campfire, there's the big logs, the big logs that you put on the bottom that just burn all night. They never make like a big flame, but they burn all night long. That's like your fats. So your body is very, very good at using them for long periods of time, but at very low intensity. So like if you go for a walk or a really light jog, your body's super comfortable at using those fats. But as the intensity goes up, you need to switch over to a more faster and explosive energy source, and that's what carbohydrates are. And if you think of a campfire, the smaller sticks you put on a campfire and you throw kindling on there, like you do that on a campfire, what happens? It goes, just blows up, right? That's essentially what carbohydrates do. So as the intensity goes up, your body goes, crap, I need some more faster, more explosive energy. I'm going to use carbohydrates. So from about 60-65% of your max, you start predominantly using carbohydrates as your energy source. So I always say to combat athletes, think of your training. How much of your training do you spend under 60%? Probably not that much. Like your warm-up, maybe if you're drilling at jiu-jitsu, like kind of doing like shadow boxing. Even when you start hitting pads, hitting the bag, you're probably going higher than 60-65%. So the majority of your training that you're doing is going to be fueled by carbohydrates. And so the mistake is, it's quite logical, right? Like if you are your body wants to use carbohydrates for the training that you're doing, but you don't have that fuel in there, It's like driving a car without the fuel. And you see this with guys in the gym that say do keto or low carb, high fat diets. They'll have that slow burning log in there. So they'll be able to have energy, but they won't ever be able to hit those top ends. They won't be able to get that top intensity. If they do, they just crash because you just build up so much lactic acid fast and you just crash out. They're the guys that never really hit that top gear. And you see that in the gym all the time. Like, they'll be good for like a minute wrestling or whatever, and then they just die. It's, not for sports, like, any sport that requires you to exert yourself for extended periods of time over 60% of your you need a lot of carbohydrates in there to fuel it.
Yeah, I also don't understand how someone could eat almost like a low and no carb and a high fat, but also eat before training. If you're having a high fat meal before training, that must just sit in your stomach for hours.
Yeah, like you know, what's that thing a lot of keto guys say to me? They're like, if I'm ever stuck, I just go to like McDonald's and buy like a double cheeseburger and then just throw the buns away. It's like, man, imagine having that before training.
Put you straight to sleep.
Yeah. Wouldn't be good.
I want to come a little bit back to the weight cut part of this in terms of water loading. I don't know if this is something you ever implement, agree with, disagree with. I guess you don't hear about it as much now in terms of a weight cutting strategy. Do you maybe want to dive into like what water loading is and whether it's something that you ever prescribe and why you would or not?
Yeah, so water loading is probably the most misunderstood concept in combat sports, and unfortunately, like, there's a lot of practitioners even that I believe really do not understand it. And I'll say that because the concepts behind it we don't understand. And one of my mentors, Riddell, is the only guy that's really studied this, and he did a study at the AIS. And what water loading is essentially you drink an increased amount of water than what you would normally. And the idea behind it is that it changes your body's ability to process that water. So if you put more water in, your body gets used to processing more water. And when we everyone knows, if you have 2 cups of water, what do? You run to the toilet and you pee it out, right? So the idea is if you put more in and keep peeing, you'll keep peeing out more. And then the idea is you put more, and then all of a sudden you drop it back down. And then your body goes, okay, I've had more water. And when you drop it down, you're not actually putting any more water in, but then you're going to keep peeing fluid out. So you actually end up peeing out excess fluid. And that's the theory behind how water loading works. And what Reed did back in 2017 at the Aussie Institute of Sport is they did the first really controlled study of it. And the idea about how it works is there was this whole theory about, I won't get into the physiology of it, pretty much like tricking your body. And you can't trick your body. Your body, like I said, you don't get 7 billion humans on Earth and last for over 300,000 years by tricking like your biology. But essentially you play, the theory was that you were playing around with these renal, like your kidney hormones, the hormones that tell you to hold water and the hormones that tell you to lose water. And the theory was that if you increase that water intake and you drink, you're going to increase the hormone that says, hey, James, keep peeing. And then if you stopped that intake for, say, 24 hours, that wasn't enough time for your body to figure out that you've actually stopped drinking water, and that hormone was still high. So your body goes, James, just keep peeing, even though water wasn't coming in, which caused you to pee out excessive amount. What Reed's study found that, and this is what loads and loads of people, I say if you ask 99% of people about why water loading works, they'll tell you exactly that. And they found that's not true. Like, that's just not happening. The complete opposite happened, is that hormone did come back down, but they did find that in the water loading group in this study, they did lose more fluid than the other group that was just drinking a normal amount. So they controlled for all those other factors like I spoke about, carbohydrates, salt, blah, 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 all these. They didn't actually control too much for salt, but they controlled for all these other things, and they found water loading did increase the urinary output of fluid, and that group lost more weight. What they found, though, was that there was a different mechanism behind it. And essentially what they found is that if you think of like a garage, like a car garage, if you've want to get 3 cars in there and you've only got one door, right, you've got to drive all of them through one door. It's going to take longer than if you had 2 or 3 doors, right? You could drive all 3 of them at the same time. What they found is that by doing and increasing this fluid intake, you're essentially opening more doors in certain parts of your kidney to allow that water out, and it takes a little while for your body to figure out, okay, we haven't actually lost that. Like, we haven't actually, like, increased the water anymore, so we'll keep these doors open and you still lose water. And that's an important distinction to make. And this is, like, very in the science, but I think it's very important because when you think about this in practice, a lot of people will go, oh, water loading is quite dangerous. Water loading is super dangerous. You'll get, like, risk of hyponatremia. I don't particularly think that's true. I don't think in the context of cutting weight, I don't think the risk of hyponatremia is as good, as large as what people make it out to be. And the reason I think that is because people don't understand that concept. And then people will always just give out a blanket statement of, hey, James, you want a water load? Just drink 8 litres. No matter if, James, if you weigh 50 kilos or whether you weigh 100 kilos, people just seem to say, hey, drink 2 gallons or 8 litres. When in reality, that concept that I just described of opening more garage doors in your kidneys, in that certain part of your kidney, can theoretically, and we see this in practice, does happen whether you increase your daily habitual intake by even up to 25, 35, 45%. So instead of, James, you drinking 8 litres, if you normally drink 2 litres every day, and I say, James, just drink 3 litres, 3.5, 4 litres, you should theoretically get that same response. And we see that. And with our guys, we don't do these, we do water loading, but I never do these extreme things when they're going to be drinking.
Yeah.
If you drink 2 litres, go, hey, James, drink 4 times that, where you're getting...
Oh, yeah. I've seen plans that go up to like 12.
Yeah, and it's insane, right? Like, but you know what? Like, I have guys that work outside and they work in the heat and they drink 10 litres every day. So 12, you know, which then we go have another conversation where you say, well, a water load probably isn't necessary. Just do a fluid restriction because your habitual intake is already so high. By bringing that down, that difference is probably going to have a physiological effect in your body. And this is the mistake a lot of people make when it comes to designing fight week plans, is they don't consider the habitual intake or the change from the habitual intake. That's why having a good fight camp plan, where you plan for how much fiber this person has, how much carbohydrate they have, how much fluid they drink every day, and then they're the things that you're manipulating in that fight week. You can control, like on the dials, you can turn down and turn up certain systems, like pull different levers to get a more pronounced effect. So, like, if I want you to cut carbohydrates, like I did stupidly, like I was saying, like keto, lose all this weight, but if you were eating keto all camp and you had no carbohydrates in your system, and then we cut them out fight week, you're obviously not going to lose any weight because you just don't have any in there to start with. So planning these things very strategically so you can change during that fight week from the habitual intake of the fight camp is really important, and it's a detail that a lot of people miss. And I'm harping on about this because I've seen a lot of people make this argument of, oh, hyponatremia. And like I'm into ultra endurance sports these days. That's kind of like what I've been into the last 18 months. And I can tell you that hyponatremia is a much greater risk in those sports, yet it's so much rarer. Like, it's so much rarer. And what you would have to do for an athlete in the setting of combat sports and cutting weight to put them at risk of hyponatremia is pretty extreme. And if you're giving someone a plan that is that extreme, where you're putting them at risk of hyponatremia, I don't think you should be practicing.
Yeah, for sure. With a water loading plan, say for example you're going from 2 litres a day to 4 litres a day, does that still increase each day? Like you see a lot of water loading plans that go from say 4 litres day 1, 6 litres day 2, 8 litres day 3, whatever it is, and then they drop it off. Is that something that needs to be done, or can you stick with that 25 to 40% over your usual intake and kind of stay there for a few days?
So again, if this is why coming back to understanding that physiology is important. It's something you learn when you learn systems physiology, is that structure equals function. And what that means is if you understand the structure of the thing that you're trying to change, you can predict the function of it. So if I was talking about that nephron, or the part of the kidney that we're trying to manipulate here, and we're opening up these garage doors to let more fluid out, right, we can achieve that with just the habitual intake. And then what do you do if you increase it more? You probably do increase more, but is it necessary? Probably not. So there's probably no need to keep increasing, because you've already increased on that habitual. And the goal is to just get that increase, right? And so there's absolutely no need to just keep pumping more and more and more fluid in.
Yeah. No, that's fair enough for everyone listening as well, so they don't have to go drink 10 or 12 litres of water the week of their fight. So that kind of saves some people, I hope.
There's one thing I'll say, James, just on that, like the last thing, because there's two options when you think about water loading. If in your everyday diet you don't drink heaps of water, like you just drink 1 or 2 litres a day, then you're increasing by that little bit, like even if you just double it and it's at that smaller amount, so you're going from 2 to 4 litres, okay, that's fine. If you drink, say, 10 litres a day and you like work outside in the heat, it's probably not a good idea for you to go, okay, I'll just double my intake and then drink 15 litres, because you're going to probably already have all of those garage doors set up and you're going to be fine to just decrease, do a 24-hour, 18-hour. We usually do a 12-hour fluid restriction. We won't do any more than that. And just do a fluid restriction because your habitual is so high, physiologically, you've already set everything up to get the same effect for what you want to achieve in a water load. So by just bringing it down for, say, 12, 18 hours, you're still going to get that effect. So that's an important thing for people to understand as well.
Yeah. So how do you then structure after the weigh-in? So let's use MMA as an example as for the 24-hour weigh-in. How do you structure the rehydration and the refueling there? Do you have this broken down based on, I don't know, body weight lost or anything like that?
Yeah, it can be pretty complex if you want to get into it. I think hydration.
Yeah, let's do it.
If you talk to anyone in sports science that tell you they understand hydration in the human body, I'll tell you someone who's lying and doesn't know what they're talking about. Because it's probably one of the only things over, say, the last 100 years that has just been consistently unknown. And it's the reason that hydration is so complex in the human body is because really there's not many good ways to measure it. We have good ways to approximate it. Say, like, if I said, hey, James, how would you measure your hydration? Say, hey, I just look at the color of my pee, which really is just telling me how hydrated your bladder is. Or we can get a bit more technical and you can take blood samples and you can look at different blood markers. But even then, that's just telling you about the hydration status of a particular part of your body, which is the fluid in your blood. But we know there's different compartments in the body that have different fluid in there. So we have fluid inside our cells, and our body is made up of billions and billions of cells. We have fluid outside those cells, and then we have fluid in the blood. Now, the reason I'm talking about this is because when we talk about weight cutting, it's very, very unique in that we tend to manipulate fluid from all of those compartments, where if I went, me and you, James, we go, hey, let's just go for a 5-10K run outside, and I don't know, we sweat like 2% of our body weight, we're probably only going to manipulate fluid from one of those compartments, which is in our blood, which is very close to our skin. And all we have to do is, I don't know, we could go to the pub after and have a beer and we could probably put that back in, you know what I mean? It's not hard to put it back in because it's so close to your skin, so close to your gut, and you can just put it back in. When you manipulate fluid from those deeper parts of your body, say outside of your cells and inside of your cells, things get a bit more complicated with how you rehydrate people. And so when we're cutting weight and we're sweating, we know if you sweat more than 4% of your body weight, the amount of fluid that you lose from deep inside your cells increases. And the percentage that you lose increases to a certain amount, and you keep losing fluid from there. And it moves through your body from inside your cell, outside your cell, to the blood, onto the skin. So then it becomes this challenge of, okay, how do we get that fluid back inside the cell? Because at the end of the day, that's what's most important. And if you think of the context of fighting, if, James, you're going into a ring and someone's going to be punching you in the head, you probably don't want your brain cells depleted. You know what I mean? Like, it's probably okay if you've got a little bit of like blood fluid volume, like blood plasma volume depletion, like a little bit, it's probably okay. But like being depleted in those cells in there is not good. So that's the problem we're trying to solve. As it is right now, what we know is that after this dehydration, you're going to be depleted in your blood. Like, that blood's going to be depleted, outside's going to be depleted, inside your cells going to be depleted. So the goal would be, right, okay, how do we get fluid back into that blood? And you can do that, James, by getting water in. If you've got enough time, if you've got 2-3 days, you can just drink water slowly and it'll eventually come in. The problem is like, you just wait in, you've probably got to fight in like 20, 24 to 36 hours. So it's like, shit, we've probably got to get this back in as fast as possible. So I also just told you not to eat carbs for 5 days. So we've got to restore all of that. And we've got to get ready for this. And you've got to mentally sleep and get ready for all of these things. So we put in what's called hypertonic oral rehydration solutions. Essentially what that means is just like, it's like a Pedialyte or a Hydrolyte. It's just a concentration of solutes, like salt and electrolytes, that is less concentrated than your blood. And what that does is when you put that in, we won't get into the science of it, it causes that fluid to move from your gut into your blood really fast. And so if you put that back in, you can get it back in really fast. You get it to your blood, then it's going to move to outside your cells and back inside your cells. So if anyone's listening and they go, okay, like, well, what do I eat then? What the recommendations is just to have 1 liter per hour and have 1,000 milligrams of sodium. I don't know necessarily how much I agree with that, knowing what I know about hydration, but what I would tell people is just go down to Chemist Warehouse, get Pedialyte or Hydrolyte, and use that and slowly drink it. A recommendation we use with athletes is have 500 mils, 500 to 600 mils in the first 15 minutes after your weigh-ins of that oral rehydration solution, so it'll be a Hydrolyte or whatever, and then have about 165 mils every 10 minutes after until you replace about 150% of what you lost. So if you lost, I don't know, if you lost a litre of fluid, you need to put back in 1.5 litres. So have 500 mils within 15 minutes and then 165 mils every 10 minutes after until you replace 150%. But you don't have to get, like, you see all these post-weigh-in drinks. Like, I've seen ones that put, like, Monster energy drink and creatine and amino acids and all these weird things. And it's like, no, that, unless I'm reading the wrong textbooks and I'm talking to the wrong fluid balance hydration experts, like, I don't know, quite understand what they're trying to do there. But your best bet is, yeah, just get like an oral rehydration solution like Hydrolyte, Pedialyte, and use that until you've replaced those fluids. And then the priority goes, okay, we replaced the fluid, James, you're technically hydrated. What's next priority is getting those carbohydrates back in. If we cut carbs, so you can get ready to fight. You've got that fuel in the car to do that high intensity activity. How many carbs do you need? You need this many carbs, go eat some pizzas and a burger.
So do you have like a recommended carb source then for that? As you mentioned, just pizza and burger there, or do you have something dependent on the athlete, I guess, what they like?
Yeah, again, it depends. Like, what I always have the rule is like, don't try anything new fight day that you haven't done during camp, right? So like, the way you set up a fight camp diet is that on your big training days, you eat quite a lot, and you want to eat pretty similar on, say, your sparring day than what you're going to do on your fight day. So if on your sparring day, you've been eating, say, oats in the morning, and then you've been having like a grilled chicken burger for lunch or whatever, and then you go off to sparring, I'm probably going to give you something pretty similar to that, like post weigh-in and on fight day. So keeping things habitual. And then again, like, we often do it where we'll have our guys, like, they will eat pizza and pasta and things like that afterwards, but it's not like they haven't been eating that in fight camp. Like, because you can make anything fit in a plan. Like, if you know how to work the numbers, you can make anything fit. So it's just really, what have they been eating? I would very much err on the side of caution of, like, okay, I haven't had, I don't know, like, KFC in 12 weeks. I'm going to go smash a bucket of KFC. It's like, yeah, it's probably not the best idea.
That went in well.
Yeah, exactly.
So what about then for weigh-ins that are shorter in duration between the weigh-in and the fight? So obviously jiu-jitsu, often you're weighing in mat side or maybe half an hour beforehand. I used to compete nationally in weightlifting, so I weigh in 2 hours before, and I actually had a really good weight cutting routine. I had Dr. Eric Helms do mine at that time, and that was really good. Gave me all that stuff in terms of being able to rehydrate and whatever afterwards. So then what would you recommend in terms of maybe let's say mat side weigh-in? Obviously someone's not going to do any acute weight loss strategies for a mat side weigh-in before they go on because you don't have time to do anything afterwards, but maybe for someone who weighs in an hour or 2 hours before, anything they can do or any recommendations they can do if they need to drop weight for that weight class, and then any recommendations depending on whatever happens before, what they should do afterwards.
it all comes down to how much time you have, right? And I think, like, even jiu-jitsu, I've done terrible ones where I've been 2 divisions running at the same time and I've cut heaps of weight and jumped in there and then had to, like, go from that to that. And, like, it's horrible. And it's horrible because, again, if you cut weight aggressively, like you were doing MMA, and you cut carbohydrates, you dehydrate yourself, you cut all your salt out, like, well, they're all very important things for your performance, right? And then you just have none of that on board, so you're just running on fumes. So you get out there and run on fumes. I think, like, for something like jiu-jitsu, it's a very, very high explosive, especially at a competition. And I think until you get to, like, your higher belts where you, like, chill out a little bit, like, if you're a white and blue belt, you're going to be operating at, like, 120, 130% at every single one of your matches. So that's important to consider. I always say to guys, if you've got, say, a mat side weigh-in, or even if you do have 1 to 2 hours, like, you can't put much back in 1 to 2 hours. Walk pretty close to your weight. There's a couple strategies you can do, what we call our low-risk strategies, like low-fiber, low-volume diet that you can use, like, 3 days up to it. You can eat heaps of carbs and you can eat pretty good amount of calories by reducing your fiber and reducing the volume, which is like the physical weight of the food. You can get some good stuff in and really fuel yourself up and still drop, not much, but, you know, anywhere from 0.5% to 3% of your body weight, depending on what your habitual diet looks like when you cut that out. You can manipulate salt a little bit. Our body's very, very good at balancing salt. So even if you reduce your salt intake for 1 to 2, maybe 3 days max, I wouldn't do it any more than that. You can lose some water weight. Again, you need to be mindful of your hydration levels. You can sweat a little bit going in there. We know, like, you can compete 2% dehydrated, be pretty good. You just need to be mindful that if you're cutting fiber, if you're cutting salt, whatever, you're already going to be dehydrated. So even if you just use your warm-up to sweat out, you're probably already 1% dehydrated. If you go, okay, 2% of my weight is 1.4, I'm going to sweat, you're probably going to be like 3%, 4% dehydrated rather than 2. So just being mindful of that. I say to all guys who have short weigh-ins, take your diet seriously weeks beforehand. Because at the end of the day, most of those sports, you're going to put yourself in a way better chance to demonstrate your skills, which skills pay the bills. In those sports, that's what's going to make you win. You're going to be able to display your skills a lot better if you're adequately fueled, you're not depleted, and you are well hydrated going into that. If you do need to cut some weight, marginal, 1 to 3% in the days leading up, and use those low-risk strategies. I would never recommend anyone to, you know, cut carbohydrates out, to jump in a sauna, to be running laps beforehand. Maybe you could have that combo at, like, a very high level if, like, it was a last-minute thing and, like, you had to do it. Maybe I'd entertain the idea, but other than that, nah, like, it's just not worth it. It's just not worth it.
Do you have any examples of maybe common high fiber foods that people would normally eat on their diet, and then the substitutes that are low in fiber?
I mean, anything that's brown, right? Like, so brown bread, brown pasta, brown rice, all of those things, like, are going to be higher in fiber. Swap it for the white. So swap your, I don't know, 5 cents bread for your white bread. Yeah, your brown rice to white rice, things like that. Peel the skin off your fruit. You know, there's lots of, like, natural low fiber foods, right? Like, I give a lot of my guys, like, milk chocolate leading up if they're, like, jiu-jitsu guys, because it's, like, got quite a lot of carbohydrates in there and then no fiber. So you can find lots of low fiber foods that have good amounts of carbohydrates, which is what you need to fuel up on to get ready for that comp. So you can, I'd play around with low fiber. But again, it's important to say this because a lot of people make this mistake. If you cut fiber out, but you don't have a good high fiber diet, and I'm talking anywhere from 30 to 60 grams per day of fiber in your daily diet, and then you cut it out, like, if you don't have it there to cut out, you're not going to lose any weight. So I get a lot of people be like, man, I tried a low fiber diet and it just didn't work. It's like, because you don't eat any fiber in your normal diet. So it's like,
you just eat lollies every day.
Yeah, exactly. So prepping your body to respond to it is very, very important. But that's and this is kind of going sidetrack, but this is why it's so important. We say to all our guys, like, eat like an athlete all year round. Like, if you don't even have, it doesn't have to be a professional job, but if you identify as an athlete or an athletic person, then eat like one. That doesn't mean you have to eat chicken, rice, and veg every single day of your life like a narcissistic, narcotic, like, bodybuilder or whatever. Like, just eat properly and eat like a performance diet all year round. You can still eat your pizza, burgers, go out and have some beers with your mates, whatever. Just eat a performance diet all year round and you'll avoid 95% of these weight cutting issues.
Yeah, no, definitely. Do you have any female athletes that you've worked with?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
thousands, heaps. Yeah.
How do you navigate the menstrual cycle then with weight cutting? Because that's obviously something that's not talked about as often, but it's obviously something that, like, so my wife competes, she's an elite level weightlifter, and obviously, you know, she's got to contend with that too. She knows certain, you know, parts of her cycle she's going to hold water and, you know, things like that.
Yeah, I won't get into the debate because I know it gets very heated when you talk about like training and the menstrual cycle, and I won't get into that because I know there's some very polarizing and passionate camps there. But in terms of like weight cutting, like what you just said, fluid retention is going to be a big one. Like, we know that at certain stages of the cycle you're going to be holding fluid, and we know at other stages of the cycle your thermoregulation can be manipulated. So like your core body temperature can be higher. So you might not need to jump and say a bath. If you do need to sweat, it doesn't have to be as hot. Or if you are training or running on a treadmill to lose some weight, you'll probably feel a bit more hot and flustered. They're probably the two biggest ones when it comes to weight cutting. The thing is with the menstrual cycle, and something you'll realize when you start working with, say, a lot of female athletes, is that it's so varied between individuals. And I think we make a mistake of like looking at research and being like, oh, maybe I should eat these anti-inflammatory foods here, and then I'll eat this food, and then this week I'll go off and do this type of training, this week I'll do this type of... Great in theory, great blanket recommendations, very much on the right path of what we need to do for our female athletes to get them to the next level. In reality, we're not quite there yet, and when you work with a lot of female athletes, you will realize just how different the cycle is for all of them. I've got female athletes that when they start bleeding, or where most athletes just don't want to move, they want to stay in bed, some of them will say, I feel so energized, I feel great. Like, this is when I want to get my big sessions in. You're like, wow, that's different. But like, that's just them. Yeah. And then you've got some athletes that will put on 2-3 kilos of fluid in their cycle, and then others, they won't notice. It won't be a blip. So it's like, you really have to spend a lot of time with them tracking it. You have to really track it. And where we're at right now with it is, yeah, there's some really promising theory, but when we try to put that in practice, it's very hazy. So what you have to do is sit down with your female athlete and have that open, honest convo. Guys, don't be weird about it. Like, if you're in performance, you need to have these conversations. Say, we need to figure out what happens to your body at every single stage, because your cycle is going to be different to her cycle. It's going to be different to hers. And if we want to say, make this weight and we want you to perform, we need to be aware of this. And we don't even need to be aware of it. It's not just what happens in one cycle. We know there can be intra-cycle variability. So, okay, well, are there patterns over this long macro cycle that we're seeing? You know, are other factors? How does stress affect this? How does, when you're 2-3 weeks out, if you're at a certain stage, how does that affect it? If you've got, you know, a lot of pressure coming on from over here, or if you're in a big training book, how does that affect it? So you just need to sit down with them, have an open conversation, be very honest, and then build that rapport with them, so that they'll be honest with you. Because that's really, over the years that I've done it with all of the female athletes, and trying to put these recommendations in place and kind of use cookie cutter program, it just doesn't work. You've just got to sit down with them and figure out, how does your cycle line up, and how do we best work with you individually.
Nice. That's good advice as well. Just before we finish this off, I actually wanted to touch on maybe your recommendations for a fighter listening who wants to maybe eat like an athlete and they want to start tracking their food. Do you have, for, say, a performance-based diet, recommended macronutrient breakdown that, you know, they could follow, something generic or general? Because obviously we ruled out keto, so we're saying eat your carbohydrates. So what would you recommend then, basically per pound of body weight or per kilo of body weight, in terms of macronutrient breakdown? Yeah,
I think the classic, like 2010, How to Make Weight in Combat Sports, by a good friend of mine, Dr. Carl Langan-Evans, kind of outlines it. It's called the 3-2-1 principle. And that's pretty much 3 grams per kilo of carbohydrates, 2 grams per kilo of protein, and 1 gram per kilo of fat. But even that's what they say when you're in fight camp and you're in a calorie deficit, right? If you're outside of that fight camp phase and you're like in your general, you know, prep phase or whatever it is, and just general training phase, you probably eat a lot more than that. Combat athletes are notoriously bad for, I think that as a community, we're probably low carbohydrate athletes. Even though most of them will eat the majority of their diet as carbohydrates, they're probably categorized as low carbohydrates. some numbers I would encourage you to aim. I don't know if you want to get out MyFitnessPal, and I don't want to have a whole discussion about diet culture and all of that thing, but like if you get out MyFitnessPal and you do track these, try to aim for somewhere between 5 to 7 grams per kilogram of your body weight every single day of carbs. And then you might think, it doesn't sound too bad. Do the maths and work it out. Like it can be a decent amount. And like I said, I'm in ultra endurance nowadays, and like we have guys that are eating 10 to 12 grams per kilo, and there's a market difference in performance. Market difference. And I think a lot of combat athletes, like I said, as a community, we're like these low carb athletes purely because by the calorie restrictions to make weight, we can't be high carb athletes. When you're outside of camp, you should be training your body to get high carbohydrates. I think hitting 2 to 2.5 grams per kilo of protein every single day is great to aim for. At least 1 gram per kilo of fat is great for keeping your hormonal health. But really make an effort to keep increasing that carbohydrates. Because eating carbs is hard. Like I think a lot of people think that like you can just smash them back. You have to train your gut is the word we use. Literally, you have to increase the receptors in your stomach and in your intestine to increase the uptake of carbohydrates in your body. So you're probably only taking now, if I probably looked at most athletes, they'd be like 3-4 grams. Try to bump that up, get it to 5 to 7. Try to get it up to 8 grams if you can. Don't worry about like putting too many calories in because you can manipulate the other two. What I would say to all combat athletes, work on training your gut and work on getting more carbohydrates in.
No, I fully agree with you there, man. I only eat pretty much high carb diets now. Like that, it just, for me as well, eating higher carb, like it digests so much quicker and easier as well. Obviously you're eating, say, for example, chicken, rice and veggies. Obviously it's generally lower fat meal if you're eating that. You can eat that 30 minutes or an hour before training and you're good, you know? Whereas if you're having, I don't know, whatever high fat meal someone's going to have, maybe like a fatty steak and whatever else, man, that stuff will sit in there for ages. That might be a nighttime meal.
Yeah, exactly. And just like I say to all our guys, is you got to practice that, right? Like, and if you break down the numbers, like, and this is going like a bit of a tangent, but say for guys who train a long time, and it's not uncommon for MMA to have like crazy 3-hour high intense trainings. It's like I've been in wrestling classes where we're training for 3 hours doing like 10-minute wrestling rounds. And it's just madness. And you can't expect someone to just come off the street, jump in that class and be able to get a good amount of carbohydrates in. But if we want to be performance athletes and you want to get anywhere from the range of 30 grams of carbohydrates, which is just a banana, up to say 120 grams, which is like a 1.5 foot Subway in per hour while you're training, you have to train your gut. You can absolutely do it. We see it in endurance sports. Like guys can get 120 grams of carbohydrates, the equivalent of a 1.5 foot of a Subway in per hour. But you can't just do that just off the bat. You're going to spew on the mats. You're going to spew on your training plan. But you can absolutely train your body to get better at that and get better at taking more and more carbs in. And it's just something that a lot of like combat athletes push to the wayside because there's that real low carb culture. But I think it's such a powerful tool, such a powerful performance tool if combat athletes start putting that to practice and start training their body to take on more carbs.
What would be your recommendation then in terms of like carbohydrates per hour for, say, for example, you had the high intensity wrestling class, that's 3 hours. In terms of maybe like a carbohydrate drink, do you have a recommendation, like it's how many carbs they should have based on the session?
Yeah, it's going to change for each person, right? But generally aiming for, I think, starting at 30 grams. Like the funny thing about, I'm talking about make sure everything's relative to your habitual diet and everything's relative to your body weight. The funny thing about carbohydrates in your body, it seems to be the one thing in nutrition that is an absolute factor, that it doesn't seem to be that if you're this size or this size, you can absorb more or less, obviously a little bit more, but not substantially where it's like significant. It seems that we can start at like 30 grams, but the max that we can say tap out one certain type of carbohydrate, like glucose or that type of sugar that we put in, is about 60 grams per hour. And if you want to go more than that, you've got to use, say, like glucose and fruit sugars or fructose as well. And you can push that right up to 120 grams per hour. So I encourage all of my guys, start at 30 grams. Like I said, that's just a banana. That's a banana.
Yeah.
Or like a Gatorade, like a 600 ml Gatorade, it's 36 grams of carbs. Start with that and see if you can get that in over the hour and then work your way up. And like I say to all my guys, work your way up to at least 60 grams per hour while you're training. If you're doing really intense sessions, like some of our top level guys, like, holy smokes, those sessions are insane. And the calories burnt, the amount of carbohydrates burnt in those sessions is just phenomenal. And it's like, we need to work up to at least 100 grams per hour. And it's taken some of them years to get up there, but they can finally get there. And it's a combination of mostly like taking in fluids and sports drinks, because then you're addressing the fluid loss and the carbohydrates. But some of them do take in food as well, and we'll use things like sports gels or like gummy chews that are just easy to get in, low volume, that are just like quick, easy to get in, like in a rest, like in between rounds and whatnot. But we do, with all of our top level guys, we really work on getting a good amount of carbs in during training.
Oh, that's awesome. So that's for anyone listening as well. Yeah, simple sports drink, take it to training with you, and you can start getting your carbs in.
That's it.
Perfect. Well, no, this has been a hugely insightful podcast regarding the weight cutting nutrition, Jordan. If anyone wants to keep up with what you're up to, and I guess any information and knowledge that you want to share, is there anywhere they can follow you?
Yeah, we got a pretty big presence on Instagram. That's probably where we're most active, the _Fight Dietitian. We have a Facebook, the Fight Dietitian as well. YouTube, just under Jordan Sullivan. We put a lot more educational content out there. This year we started a podcast as well, the TFD Performance Podcast, where we talk a lot more about like the theory, but how it translates into practice. So if you're kind of into sports nutrition, I'd highly recommend people go over there. We do have another podcast as well, the Fight Science Podcast. Which essentially I created a couple of years ago, where I pretty much got all the experts that I know around the world, and we just spoke about how do you do this in practice. And so if you're into the actual science of fighting, go over to the Fight Science Podcast, and all that info is free, and it's pretty valuable.
Perfect. Well, thanks for coming on, Jordan. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me.